If you love our crypto content or are looking to learn even more about crypto, be sure to check out and subscribe to our new YouTube channel after this video dedicated to all things crypto. Find new videos every week. Be sure to check the link in the description.
Piers, great to get you on Real Vision. It seems that, one by one, I know you've left Delphi now, but the Delphi team have been on Real Vision enlightening us. So welcome.
Well, I'm very glad to be here. Thank you for having me on.
Before we start, I'd love to get a bit of your background, where you came from and how you got into this ridiculous journey that you're on now.
Yeah, so I was born in London, currently live in London, but sort of born here, spent a lot of time online growing up around video games, as many of us do. I've got 4 brothers now, but 2 at the time, and all of us together explored, all kinds of different game environments. For a period of my life, I was forced to use exceptionally low-end hardware. So it kind of forced me down, messing around with different kind of Linux distros and trying to find out the kind of lightweight operating systems, stuff like Ubuntu to kind of, run these games without laptops melting back in the day. From about 2005, we were all pretty obsessed with a game called RuneScape, this sort of MMORPG. I think it sort of in the 90s was the first instance of the game to be released. And we played that pretty religiously. Still do, on weekends and stuff, however many years later. I think that's kind of how I got into crypto originally was many years after I first logged into that game. We were messing around doing some sort of gold farming style stuff on RuneScape. Along the way, like some of the guys that were sort of involved with that operation, I think one of their brothers was actually mining Bitcoin way back in the day. This was like summer of 2012 at the point that it actually happened. And so that was sort of my first exposure to crypto, which kind of eventually obviously set me off down a pretty long path. I've messed around with all kinds of sort of gaming along the way beyond that, played some competitive Rainbow Six, which was good fun. Like Oculus, got involved with some of that stuff pretty early on. All the VR stuff I've been a huge fan of as time's gone on. But yeah, I guess got involved with the whole crypto thing through games pretty early on.
What was it you saw in crypto that got your attention? Because you're coming from everyone comes in from a different angle, right? Some people come from the philosophy, some people come from finance, some people come from like Austrian School of Economics, some are technologists, you've come through gaming. What was it that you saw that made you go, oh, that's interesting?
Well, in total honesty, I don't think I necessarily did find it that interesting back then. I didn't really have the mental framework, right, to really appreciate or contextualize any of this stuff. And I think even if I had back then at that age, I was 13 at the time, right, when I first came across this stuff. I was super young, like even if I did have the sort of reference framework to kind of fully appreciate it, I don't think thought around it was that developed anyway. It's still pretty early on back then. But I think as time's kind of worn on, having grown up, very familiar with virtual currency and digital value and that kind of being such a big part of my whole sort of, childhood, I've really seen it like up close, that whole dimension. And I think for me, coming across the idea of this, digital currency that was like almost to my mind, like a sort of universal digital currency, right? The bedrock of this whole new kind of financial system that was emerging, like that to me was just super resonant. And I think as time went on.
Sorry for interrupting your video, but I have an important message to share. At Real Vision, we pride ourselves on providing the very best in-depth expert analysis available to help you understand the complex world of finance, business, and the global economy. So if you like what you see on Real Vision's YouTube channel, that is just the tip of an iceberg. You should come over to realvision.com and see how we are not leaving any stone unturned, from publishing more in-depth videos, live discussions, written reports, and our latest feature, The Exchange, where you get a chance to engage with experts and fellow subscribers and learn from everyone's experience. It is an experience which you live and you learn from. So if you go to the link in the description or go to realvision.com, it costs you just $1. I don't think you can afford to be without it.
To my mind, like a sort of universal digital currency, right? The bedrock of this whole new kind of financial system that was emerging. Like that to me was just super resonant. And I think as time went on, obviously dug in more and more, familiarized myself with the whole sort of, mining mechanics and proof of work. And as I grew up, as I read more, about history and economics and philosophy and computers and stuff, like this was the thing. This was kind of my benchmark as I grew. And so I kind of like added, to my understanding of crypto as it went on, in parallel to how sort of like the period of my life where I was kind of building my worldview, right, and growing up and reading more and all of this kind of stuff. So for me, it's actually been a constant for many, many years now, and something I've had enormous conviction in that's only grown as I've understood more about the topics that kind of support it.
But what's been fascinating, you wrote a phenomenal article about the metaverse and how you see it, because most people, again, they kind of think this is a finance thing. They're kind of starting to get tokens, but there's a lot of uproar, like this is bullshit. This is all. People don't get the really big picture. And you wrote a phenomenal article about the really big picture, because you've lived in a digital world, right? I never lived in a digital world. Yeah, I played arcade games and I grew up on Space Invaders, but it wasn't the same way. We didn't interact with each other in games as much. You've lived in a digital world. So what, I know it's a difficult question, but lay it out on us. Where do you think this is all going? Because you've got a very complex, nuanced idea.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. So yeah, I mean, obviously you use the word metaverse. Increasingly, people are familiar with that term. But
what do you mean by it first?
I actually have a definition that I usually whip out, but I mean, I'm going to fail if it's off the top of my head. But so the metaverse I define as a persistent live digital universe that affords individuals a sense of agency, social presence, and shared spatial awareness, along with the ability to participate in an extensive virtual economy with societal impact. I always point out that last part is borrowed from Tim Sweeney directly, who's the founder and CEO of Epic Games, the builders of the Unreal Engine, which supports most large, graphically intense video games out there, as well as Fortnite, which most people will be familiar with by now. But effectively, even since kind of the early 90s and late 80s, there was this idea popular with sort of sci-fi authors like Neil Stephenson and William Gibson at the time as well, of us evolving into this, shared, persistent virtual world where hundreds of millions or billions of people will live, simultaneously.
This is the Ready Player One world.
It is, exactly. I mean, that's, an incarnation of it. It's one that, if you're to scrutinize, it's probably not one we want in many respects. And it's also, the reason why all of this tech becomes really interesting to this stuff. But, the broader idea is just that we're going to continue to sort of evolve as a digital species until the point where, a vast amount of value is sort of created and consumed in digital worlds. They will, to some extent, the nature of our sort of interpersonal interactions within these virtual digital mediums is also going to evolve to the point where, we can at least with reasonable efficacy replicate like your dominant social cues, eye contact, body language, facial expressions, that stuff's all coming. But I mean, that's obviously an idea that's always excited me enormously. It's an idea that to my mind is a total inevitability. And it's also an idea that, as many rightly point out, like we're already seeing the early instances of that, right? I mean, a lot of the things that are kind of described in that, parts of them happen in a rudimentary form already. Obviously, COVID is a big sort of catalyst for some of these trends. Like more and more people are spending more time digitally. But for me, there's this sort of inevitable intersection with decentralized networks and all of these technologies coming out of crypto. And I mean, effectively, these tools that we now have in terms of building these robust, decentralized sort of networks that can replicate some of the functions that either currently exist around finance. Obviously, we're seeing with sort of Bitcoin and stuff, but we're beginning to see built off platforms like Ethereum, us be able to replicate some of the applications from Web 2, but not beholden to these sort of Web 2 business models anymore. The value extractive, ad driven, often sort of exploitative business models that underpin Web 2. And I mean, that's the really exciting part for me, is that, with these new tools, we can actually build towards the Ready Player One world, where it's not, the Oasis isn't owned by a single company, rather a decentralized network supported by however many millions of computers around the globe, and where, there isn't sort of, obviously the loyalty centers and whatnot in Ready Player One aren't exactly a world we want to get to. But yeah, sorry, go ahead.
So what you're thinking is, as we spend more time immersing in a new digital world, that we end up creating value, exchanging value, earning, all within that world. So it doesn't necessarily have to exist in the physical world at all. And there's an equivalence between physical value and digital value. I guess that's where you're seeing this all going, right?
Absolutely. And I'd argue that, at least for me and some of my peers, they're already growing up with the vast majority of their net worths or whatever in natively digital value, in value that would actually be difficult to pull into the real world and fiat currency. There's frictions associated with some of that. I think there is an entirely new generation that are growing up where that concept of digital value is just super intuitive, and it's almost weird to draw a distinction between physical and digital there. I mean, I know, the vast majority of, sort of people I've grown up playing games with, my brothers, whatever, take enormous pride in albeit in a video game, or albeit some, crypto collectibles through NFTs now, or, a portfolio of sort of investments you've built yourself in crypto now. People take enormous pride in those. And yeah, they obviously are purely
for me, it's no different than the fact that I will overpay for a t-shirt because I want to buy it from a particular designer. It's probably worth $2 to make, but I'll pay 50 because I want to affiliate myself with that brand. I mean, that's as ridiculous as a human trait, and an equivalent human trait to doing the same digitally. Why would you not? If you're representing yourself in the digital world, whether it's clothing or whether it's anything else, whether it's a sword in a game or whatever it may be, it's the same trait. Just because it's digital doesn't make it different, I think.
Absolutely. I mean, yeah, there's that, social signaling component of any of that. It's quite, in terms of evolutionary psychology or whatever, it's very easy to sort of explain around that stuff. We understand what the motives are very well. And it's why wouldn't those behaviors translate into the digital realm? And what about when you get into a digital realm where it's not just you're maybe in a room at a dinner table with 10 of your best mates, but all of a sudden that social signaling, anyone can view your wallet. You have this infinite leverage that comes with the internet, and whatever you've decided to put value into because you want to, signal socially or whatever. I mean, that can now happen at mass scale. Millions of people could look at your inventory or your avatar or whatever's equipped. So I think not only do these things translate into the digital world, I actually think they're in some respects amplified by it.
Now, people are also earning money in the digital world. How are people doing that these days? Because that's already developing. There's an economy, a full digital economy going on, right?
Absolutely. And I think people, so yes, there's loads of activity happening in the sort of crypto land, which I'll get onto in a sec, but I would preface it by saying even going back to the early noughties with gold farming and video games. I mean, I mentioned myself with RuneScape and stuff. That stuff's been going on for years. And these are huge operations across RuneScape and World of Warcraft. People that run these gray markets doing, Counter-Strike Go skin trading was huge. Right now you could log into player auctions and buy a Fortnite account with whatever kind of, items you want on. And all of those are sort of managed by a middleman or whatever. These behaviors already exist, despite the fact that they happen in a game environment that is adversarial to those activities, right? If you get caught, you get banned. You're forced to trade out of the game ecosystem. You risk getting scammed. You might be lucky with your middleman on player auctions, but there's all of these threats. What we now have with crypto is so the big unlock with NFTs for me, with non-fungible tokens, is this idea of, a universal digital representation and ownership layer. And you can effectively think of this as...
We're talking about an interoperability layer between games?
Yeah, absolutely. So that's one of the perks. But I think the first sort of component to wrap the head around is... all of a sudden, you can now express any form of sort of media or content in the same language online that has embedded sort of, economics and, as I say, the ownership history is a huge one. So now whether it's, the interoperability comes exactly as you say. If I wanted to trade between, a Fortnite skin and a Call of Duty skin, if both of these skins were NFTs. They're expressed through the same language, the same technology. They can be traded on the same global open marketplace like OpenSea, and you can kind of transact these things directly. It obviously collapses sort of huge barriers around the way that these activities currently manifest. And I mean, already we're seeing obviously games like Axie Infinity you'll be familiar with. These guys are pioneering the whole play to earn game genre. It's a whole new sort of business model whereby, as I mentioned, that desire for, on the one hand, one person's kind of performing work within these virtual environments, right? People will train up accounts that, like the gold farmers, they often do power leveling as well. They'll log into an account, they'll train it up, and then they'll sell it. Obviously, time preference, someone with money wants to come in and be maybe level 100 or whatever it is. That stuff's been going on for ages. It's kind of, it's not news to us, but these new game environments are designed around people, doing that work, but being able to exchange that work or fulfill a certain function within a game and be rewarded for doing so without having to, collect that reward or that incentive on an external gray market. So even in a game like Axie, there's so many different points of engagement. People are like breeding different Axies. They're battling them in PvP. You can now develop sort of virtual real estate, drop different you can build different things on the map basically and collect revenue for people paying for services on top of your virtual real estate and so on. So we're starting to see these awesome new game environments, which like their very sort of structure is designed to invite people in to fulfill these activities and earn a portion of effectively, the overall revenues generated by the game economy. Because these things are all fully tokenized and all sort of run effectively a portion of all revenues flowing through the game are sort of siphoned off to anyone who owns these governance tokens. So they can effectively share in the upside of the success of the game, which is super neat.
And so those tokens, are they exchangeable? So they're earning stuff. Is they exchangeable for fiat or other crypto? What can they do with them once they've got them?
Yeah, so it depends where you are. Interestingly, you mentioned the fiat component. In the Philippines, they already have like fiat gateways at the local sort of trading desks down there because this activity is picking up so much. I had a guy called Colin Golcher on my podcast, and he was telling me about that because he does a lot of work sort of on the ground in the area for Binance, and that was fascinating. You go to your local trading desk and you can actually trade. So there's an in-game currency, a native game currency called SLPs, which stands for small love potions. And you use those to do things like pay a breeding fee. You can literally go and exchange those for your local currency in the Philippines, in these emerging markets where it's sort of like, these are the places where these games have really exploded so far, right? So going back to the gold farming example, we often see, large scale gold farming operations in like Venezuela or sort of Pakistan, places that kind of capitalize upon this concept of virtual labor arbitrage. And I mean, as a result, this sort of these play to earn economies have already shown most appeal in, some of these similar kind of markets. And that's why the ecosystem is almost like end to end there, like around the, in the Axie instance, and you can go and just cash out straight to fiat or whatever. But most of these people aren't doing that. Most of these people are reinvesting into the game economy, which is super neat to see.
So we're seeing people now saving, creating wealth and saving digitally in a digital world, and they don't necessarily bring it out because they have more use cases for it in the digital world.
Absolutely, yeah, it's wicked to see. And then we're seeing some.
Is there a yield curve and stuff on some of this stuff? Outside of what we're seeing in Ethereum. Do you get paid to hold certain stuff or to lend it out or whatever?
So it's funny you say that. Literally what I just wanted to say, I wanted to talk about, there's a company called Yield Guild, which we've invested in. We led their seed round, but this gives you a really good flavor for where this stuff's all going. Effectively, what they've recognized is that they can match kind of the supply and demand of around these worlds, right? So effectively, some of the really high-end Axies with which you can, again, deploy in a game and fulfill a certain function in order to earn reward on it, right? And participate in this play-to-earn economy. The better your Axie, the greater the likelihood of generating a higher yield, right? Because if you're battling it, you're going to win. If you're breeding it, its genes effectively are really worth a lot. And so you could earn lots of money doing that. But some of these axes are going for hundreds of thousands of dollars. You know, Delphi, we accumulated a portfolio of 5 axes, which have gone crazy. But so there's that side. There's, in some respects, the super high end of these markets is already inaccessible. And then on the other side, you have people that are coming into these games and want to work and want to earn money within them, right? But perhaps they can't really access those super high end axes because they now cost $1 million each. So what Yield Guild effectively does is coordinates between the two to allow the worker to effectively borrow the axie, deploy it in the relevant gaming function, and keep a portion of the yield generated. It's so cool. And that's not just
unbelievable. It's unbelievable.
Yeah. And so it's not just, it's like the player staking model, right? Where a sponsor will sort of pay for your tournament entry or whatever. But it's super exciting. And it's not just Axie. There's a bunch of games they're working on. I mean, they're also building a sort of a treasury whereby they invest in all of these games super early and accumulate, you know, prime virtual real estate and other kind of assets on top of which we can generate yield. And I mean, Yield Guild's kind of the first player to a lot of these games, effectively brings in a well-structured, like polished community to start, you know, being a major force in all of these different virtual game economies. It's awesome.
Is anybody creating yield from real estate on these yet? You know, out of Decentraland or any of this?
Yeah, it's all in the works. I haven't seen any, like, I mean, it's still early on, but that's exactly the intent with a bunch of this. I mean, Yield Guild's accumulating a bunch of Axie land to do exactly that. But, you know, in terms of data to point to just yet, it's like still getting started, but give it 12 months, even in that period of time, it's going to massively change. I mean, yeah.
People will be watching this and this is going to be blowing their minds, right? So now we're talking about living in a virtual world of which you can earn and transfer value and earn yield outside of anything to do with any traditional finance system whatsoever.
That's the crazy part. That's the key enabler, is this parallel financial system with all of this nuts, you know, frictionless value transfer. There's no, I mean, it just wouldn't even be remotely possible, any of this stuff, without it. And it's like, you know, each of these kind of building blocks are just layering on top of each other. Obviously, we have Bitcoin as kind of like the sort of base layer of all of this stuff. But since kind of Ethereum's emerged, I mean, I don't know, it's just wicked to see all the different components coming together. And I mean, anyone in the space still has this crazy feeling that it's just not even close to getting started.
Oh, it's not even started, because you mentioned it before. Once you start understanding how VR fits into all of this, you get to live in the world as well. So you're not viewing it in 2D, you're in 3D. I mean, the thing that blew me away with getting an Oculus headset was not any of the games or anything else. It was the first room that you go at the startup screen. And it's like, this is gorgeous. You can live in that room. And it was at that point you realize that, well, I could rent out a house. You could create property that has value because people can live in it in a digital world. I mean, I don't think people are yet doing much speculative development of digital property, but it's amazing what you can do.
It's in the works. We now have dedicated voxel architects who are being hired to design, you know, properties in these different worlds and getting paid reasonably for it. The really cool thing about a lot of this, though, is that, like, with this whole UGC component, user-generated content, and like we're already seeing it with crypto art and you know, other forms of creators sort of monetizing their work. But we're basically, the way these NFTs kind of work is that, let's say in the context of user-generated content, I'm like a 3D modeler and I design a really cool 3D asset that everyone's like, maybe it's some beautiful armchair that everyone's going to want to own in their virtual houses or something. I can basically, you know, set up the kind of contracts around it in such a way that maybe only like 100 of them are sold to begin with at some kind of auction. They go crazy, but you can basically, now I could embed royalties in that so that every single time those chairs or whatever they are change hands in perpetuity, I'm collecting 10%. Or I might actually make those royalties programmable and dynamic in some sense. So at the first sale, I collect 50% of the revenue. At the second, 40%. You know, you can make these things cascading or whatever you want. So there's insane experimentation to be done around all of this stuff. It's really neat.
I mean, the amount of money that's going to get made and generated in all of this, it's like Russia in 1990 came onto the world with the world's largest amount of commodities, and they basically just gave them away to people, and everybody became a billionaire. And what you've got here is there is an enormous land grab of opportunity that's gigantic. You know, people are used to spending their time doing certain things to create an income or a yield or whatever it may be. And this is saying, actually, you don't have to do any of that. You can do it completely differently in a parallel universe, and it's going to be equally as applicable.
Absolutely. And it's like, and these things are just infinite in scale. To actually produce a lot of these things, you know, it's all like zero marginal cost of production for a lot of this digital stuff if you want to issue as many as you do. And they last forever. I mean, they're completely durable. You can start thinking about things really differently. There's no maintenance fees to this stuff. I'm pretty confident that if I start building this community here in this particular sector of this particular virtual world that I have conviction in, you know, you can start thinking on 10, 20-year horizons in a digital sense. Like, think about building a company or a collective or a community or a DAO as they manifest, a decentralized autonomous organization in crypto that, you know, you can seed with the hope that it's still around in like 30 years. Like, I don't know, I think it really changes the mindset around a lot of this stuff too.
Yeah, because it's almost like rediscovering the Americas again, or whatever it may be. You've got a promised land. Now, does it work? Does it not work? You know, who knows? There's always risk. There was risk in being a frontiersman going to the United States or Australia. But if you get the prime real estate in the right places, it's going to be worth, you know, literally billions. What are these worlds that are out there right now? Anyone's I'm aware of is Decentraland and what's the other one? Axios?
So yeah, there's Axie Infinity, and that's more of that's less of a virtual world. So I often like to make a distinction between like the sort of crypto games that are being built and like the virtual worlds, in that the virtual worlds themselves are like platforms for a bunch of other experiences, right? Lots of things are built on top of them. The four major ones are Decentraland, the Sandbox, Crypto Voxels, which is super like grassroots. It was originally made by just a single developer called Ben Nolan, and it's wicked. And then the fourth is Somnium Space, which is like you can install on Steam. It has full VR support. You can, you know, mess around. I mean, from within Somnium Space, you can load up a tablet with your avatar and go to a web browser and open Crypto Voxels and play the other game from inside VR in the base game. I mean, it's wicked already. This stuff's like getting really far out. And you mentioned, you know, it's kind of like building experiences on top of these things. You mentioned Decentraland off the bat. One of the really cool projects I love in there is called Decentral Games, and it's starting in Decentraland, but has plans to expand well beyond eventually. And effectively what they've done is built a bunch of casino games. You can go in, you can gamble. They have all the relevant gambling licenses and everything. You can go, you know, they have poker, they have blackjack, they have slots, whatever. You can go and gamble, play all of these games. But instead of there being like a house, they have replaced it with a community-owned protocol where all fees generated by this casino effectively flow to this single pot of money on chain that anyone can own the stake in. And as gambling across these virtual worlds increases and, you know, fees accrue to this central part, you can share in the upside of it. And owning tokens, you can participate in governance around it. Maybe, you know, what new games are coming out. But they have gambling licenses to do this, and they're completely unchallenged. There's zero competition. And it's like, you know, they could easily replicate this model across every new game or experience that comes out. It's all built on open, interoperable standards. Like, it's all doable. It's awesome. I love it.
It's fucking mind-blowing. So the other thing that I've loved is the fact that people have got live music now in these digital worlds.
Yeah.
Talk me through some of that stuff that's going on, because people haven't got their heads around this yet either.
I mean, yeah, there are... So we're already beginning to see some beautiful examples of like this whole interoperability component, right? Of where all these different experiences can kind of mash up together. I mentioned playing one game from inside another, but a really cool recent one, which had a bunch of live music on it. I mean, so basically DJs are coming in and like playing sets in these virtual worlds if you go to different places at a certain time, but often they do them around an event. The one most recently that was really fun, and I'll try and explain it as quickly as possible, was called Metapalooza. Basically, you may or may not have seen a digital artist called Beeple. He's been making an artwork every single day for over 14 years now. Recently, with crypto, he started monetizing some of those artworks. They've been really successful. A couple of them have sold for, well over $1 million. On the secondary markets, one's gone from 6.6 already. Currently, there's a live Christie's auction, which is the first ever digital artwork to be auctioned at Christie's. It's already at $10 million. There's 48 hours left, so check it out. If it goes for over 20, that's in the top 10 highest selling artworks ever, which is something people pointed out. Anyway, at one of his auctions, he was selling 21 single editions, and basically one guy bought 20 of those, but nobody knew it was a single person. Really well orchestrated operation. Bought them for like 2.2 million. He took all of those artworks and put them in a contract along with virtual art galleries that he had built in each of these worlds we just discussed, and then fractionalized ownership of it by issuing a token called B20 that anyone could buy and anyone could share in, this journey, this story. And they had a launch party in CryptoVoxel, well, actually throughout all the worlds that we had to jump successively through. Live music, Easter egg hunt. We were whizzing around like having to hunt for these things. And if you collected all of them, you'd unlock wearables for your avatar, which represented, you being at the event. I mean, it was nuts. It was crazy. And
so
obviously
well
people were
thought
there,
out, right? So well thought out.
Yeah, I mean, people are putting serious time and energy and thought into these things. And I mean, we're like a couple of years into these worlds.
Who are the big players who are doing all of this stuff, right? Who's developing all of this? Where's it coming from?
Well, I think a lot of it's just sort of almost community led around a lot of these things, because again, like the nature of almost this sort of composability that you get through the open source nature of all of this stuff is that like every additional person coming into the ecosystem or developer wanting to build something doesn't need to do it all from scratch. All of these building blocks currently exist that you can like plug and play and add to. So I think it like compounds innovation and the rate of progress in a really exciting way. But the big people, developing these things right now, obviously Decentral raised a bunch of money in an ICO and they're doing great stuff. But I mean, yeah, there are project teams. There's the guys from the Sandbox based out of Paris and actually Argentina as well, a bunch of the team. But I mean, they're just doing awesome work. I mentioned Ben Nolan, who is like a one-man dev team who's built all of crypto voxels, which is amazing to see. There's a community called Webaverse. There's a dude called Jin in there, and Ava, I think is his name, building some insane stuff. I mean, really taking like web standards and openness to the next level. I mean, these are the kind of guys that if I want to have a chat with them, it's like, no, I'm not calling you. Like, I need to hop into one of their VR rooms and like hang out with them. It's like, it's wicked.
So, okay, I want to move away a little bit and talk and come to some other areas that I'm interested in. Where are NFTs going? Because everyone's like, oh my God, this is a bubble. Personally, I think this is just the very early stage of something much bigger than people understand. Where do you think it's going?
Yeah, I think ultimately NFTs will be used to represent like the vast majority of any content that needs to be collected or monetized on the internet. Period. I think the upside, on
that's
these
music,
things,
that's visual stuff, that's anything, right? Video,
that's anything. Yeah. I mean, it's like tickets, for attending virtual events, whatever you want. I mean, you can ascribe pretty much anything to these things. They're just a mechanism through which you can, express this stuff, but they can really be used to describe pretty much anything. I mean, ultimately, we're already seeing things like financial products, like insurance contracts tokenized as NFTs. I think ultimately, as the area of focus matures, we'll see, NFTs used to, describe sort of rights to real world assets. So those can then be introduced to this new financial system and used as collateral in addition to, the current stuff we've got available to us. That said, I mean, obviously it's completely, super hot right now. I was just last night having a look. Since I put out that essay about 45 days ago, there's been an additional $662 million of transaction volume in NFTs, which is just insane. In 45 days, trading things like, collectible crypto punks or, NBA Top Shot as Top Shots, as you would have heard. But yeah, I think we're probably in for a cool off at some point, but I understand everyone's enthusiasm.
How are these things going to be tradable? You're creating millions of things. How do they become tradable? Do we just price them all in Bitcoin or something? You need to create some sort of joint value system, right? Because it's really complicated. How are you thinking that's going to get solved?
Absolutely. I think you do need that sort of unit of account, right, for all of these things. Currently, I mean, you can price and sell NFTs in whatever you want. A lot of people do it in USDC or DAI, or Decentral has its own currency called Mana. I think the hardcore NFT community use ETH as the unit of account. And obviously, you quickly point out that that's pretty volatile, but most people in the space at this stage kind of assume that ETH's going to appreciate over X horizon, and therefore don't mind pricing stuff in ETH, even if there's, localized volatility.
How do people find liquidity? So let's say you bought an NFT. It's very nascent right now. But currently you buy an NFT, let's say it's a piece of art. You say now, you think it's gone up, you try and flip it for a profit. Who do you sell it to? Where is the marketplace for all of this? And how does price discovery happen?
Yeah, so the marketplaces, I mean, there are two universal ones that kind of underpin most stuff, unless it's a custom job. Those are OpenSea and Rareable. OpenSea, I mean, a lot of custom marketplaces you see out there, OpenSea is actually running the back end. Pretty much any NFT listed on Ethereum will appear on OpenSea. So that's like the global liquid marketplace that you can go to if you want. But as NFTs grow in variety of application, we're seeing trading venues for these things fracture. So the early example that's really developed relative to other categories is art. I mean, you can trade art on OpenSea, but most of it's done through, Nifty Gateway, Super Rare, Maker's Place, Known Origin, Async, and so on. It's already, there's 5 marketplaces, each of which kind of distinguish themselves in slightly different ways. We'll see the same happen for game assets. There will be a huge global game marketplace that emerges where, there's most of the buyers and sellers for that particular style of NFT are there. But I think we'll see that broader landscape fracture into really specialized niches, like sort of custom front ends to the broader protocols. Again, like these things exist on Ethereum. So anyone that plugs into Ethereum can see all of the assets on there and trade them. But it's just, again, about that like contextualized front end. So that's a kind of trend that I expect will keep playing out. In terms of liquidity on them, I mean, at the moment, obviously it's super frothy, but all this stuff's highly subjective in terms of what's going to be sellable or whatnot. I mean, people claiming that there's that much method to the madness, I'm sometimes skeptical of. But because NFTs trade hands so infrequently, they are hard to price, right? These super high-end NFTs often won't really have, they definitely don't have any sort of form of liquid price, sort of price point. But we're seeing things like, I mean, I mentioned the fractionalization component already. As people fractionalize, whether that's a sort of index fund, a basket of assets that, for example, represent the floor price of a particular category of NFT in a particular game, that's one way to get a liquid price. We're seeing sort of appraisal games emerge. There's a protocol called Upshot that's been built, which is super interesting. And they effectively, using kind of information theory, can incentivize people to respond honestly to a series of questions. So I might be presented an NFT. Do I think it's in X, Y, or Z price bracket? That's one style of question. And then they'll cross-reference that against another person who's asked, do I think this NFT is worth more or less? Which one's worth more out of 2, sorry. So, and then they'll basically stitch all of that data together to come up with a sort of reliable price estimate without the NFTs having to change hands. And all of that is callable via an API. So we'll start to see exchanges like OpenSea or whatever in the future integrate that as a data point for people trying to make informed decisions about this stuff.
Jesus Christ, this stuff is so advanced that most people who are still arguing about Bitcoin have no comprehension of how far advanced this whole world is already. Because it's not like you're talking conceptual stuff. Every single thing you've talked about is actually happening, which is frankly mind-blowing. The other part I want to talk about that I'm really interested in as well is community tokens. People are starting to realize that you don't need a middleman in the middle of communities. So, you and I have been having conversations with a friend of mine about this. How do you think this whole community thing plays out, the power of community and what that means?
I think it's enormous. I think it's twofold. From the creator or whoever kind of hosts. Let's use the creator example, right? If you're a creator, you now all of a sudden have this wicked, very direct method of monetizing your audience. You can either sell them limited edition NFTs, or you can issue, as you say, these a sort of social token, which represents a share in your kind of fandom. That token in terms of core utility, in terms of stuff that's already developed, that might, for example, I buy 1,000 Raoul tokens. I log into Discord. You have a Discord channel where most of your community is. And there's a Discord plugin which just cross-references my wallet. And if I have over 1,000 tokens, I get access to a private channel, or the super fans are, or something like that. That's the early sort of rudimentary stuff that's already working. But the sky is the kind of the limit in terms of applying utility to these things and coming up with a context in which they can be deployed. And then the flip side is the fan, right? All of a sudden, these people are given a mechanism through which they can participate in the success of someone they love economically, as well as in a community sense. I think the kind of strength of the relationship is just, massively sort of amplified in that people feel genuinely aligned, beyond just like following and retweeting and stuff. They feel like they have a stake, a share in the upside. They feel like they have actual sort of ownership, partial ownership in that community. And therefore their sort of willingness to preach and evangelize and engage others and ensure the success of that creator.
Yeah, you create network effects. You encourage network effects.
Absolutely. And like the big problem that's still a bit unclear around like being able to buy directly into the community tokens aspect is like, sort of securities law, and at what point, if you're sort of buying those things with an expectation of sort of them appreciating, like that stuff's a bit murky. Currently, people are getting around that by effectively the way fans earn those tokens. They don't buy them, they earn them effectively. So it might be retweeting or liking. I mean, you can be very generous with the distribution of those tokens, but that's kind of the way around it for the time being. But yeah, I mean,
because it kind of blows apart the advertising. It blows apart the advertising model, which is something you talked about before, right? Because now you're creating a direct value system between the creator and the community. They both benefit. And within it is no need to sell them anything necessarily. You don't even have to sell an NFT. And even an NFT is not a third-party brand getting in the middle of the conversation.
Absolutely, yeah. And like you see that all the time of these big social platforms that just sit in the middle of that creator audience interaction and accrue the vast majority of the value. I mean, monetization in the music industry, for example, it's horrendous. It's criminal unless you're in that top percentile. It's terrible. And the same is true, in esports or for a lot of streamers. I mean, like that's just the way that these Web2 platforms have been constructed. But absolutely, there's a viable monetization sort of alternative now that's like a win-win for the creator and the audience, just not the Web2 platform.
There's another final one area that I'm thinking that is going to get hugely disrupted in all of this is education. Because when you think about that virtual world, I mean, education has already been disrupted by video. But, one of the experiences people complain about is they can't hang around with each other in video. But Gen Z, everybody hangs around with each other on games anyway. Mm-hmm. So virtual universities are a shoo-in, right? They're definitely going to happen. Because you can create a perfect environment where you scale lecturing to millions of people at high quality. You get to meet other students. You get to, grow up within the university environment without ever having to go there.
Well, I 100%. I think it's twofold. On the one hand, there's like the economics of it, and on the other hand, it's like the actual nature of learning too. And I'll get onto that one at the second. But in terms of the economics, I mean, all of a sudden, again, with these more direct sort of monetization mechanisms, you can see a world in which effectively the market decides. You basically end up with like the top 10% of teachers in the world teaching 90% of the world's kids through one of these platforms. It's very meritocratic.
Paid like rock stars.
And they'd be, tens of millions, hundreds of millions, as they should. And then the second component, which is what's enabled by VR, but I feel is like relatively unexplored still, is there's an entire subset of kids, of people who have grown up and haven't felt that well like represented by the sort of education system, or felt like it really pushed them in the right way. Obviously, everyone learns in a slightly different manner. Like, I think this concept of kinetic learning with virtual reality is super interesting, whereby all of a sudden we can begin to design experiences that through motion, actually you can physically learn to do something, be that an actual, sort of motor skill or something that benefits from that, or whether that's like actually physically walking through some kind of environment that's teaching you something that, doesn't rely on any sort of motor function or whatever. I think that component's super interesting too. I'm really excited to see where that goes. There was the funny example recently that I saw on Reddit when Half-Life Alyx came out. This hotly anticipated game. Half-Life 3 has been a meme since I was 6 years old, and it got teased like 2 years ago, and it came out in VR. It was awesome. It's the only game to ever get in the top 10 of Metacritic. That's a VR game. Anyway, some teacher with COVID realized that in one of the levels there's like dusty pane of glass, and decided it would be interesting to teach the remote lectures by using his finger to just like draw on this dusty window in Half-Life Alyx and like teach the whiteboard lectures that way. And it blew up obviously on Reddit. It was super cool to see, but that's like a once removed version of the stuff I'm talking about. But obviously that appeals to kids way more, and they find it cool, and obviously it's going to engage them more. So I think, huge potential here that I'm super excited for.
I've just made me think of another area that I don't know enough about: esports. How's this all developing as well, fitting within this whole kind of crypto digital framework?
Yeah, well, I think esports is a super interesting one, whereby like the sort of monetization of that industry is like not great. And I think for a lot of the players around that, again, players or the big sort of influencers and streamers in there, like some of the same problems that we see perhaps in the music industry kind of exist. So I think absolutely we're going to see, people move into this more creator economy, do drops, monetize their audience, build cooler ways for fans to participate in, them as kind of a stars, if you like. But I still think, esports still has an enormously long way to go. A lot of people don't quite appreciate like the viewer numbers of esports now. I think it was like with the League of Legends final beating the Super Bowl viewership and stuff. It's like, it's like hundreds of millions of people watching something.
And also, I'm just thinking that as there's a whole massive and growing exponential community of people who live digitally and have digital savings, then people will digitally attend sporting events. So you're going to change the entire pricing dynamic by taking it away from how it's being monetized now by external brands and entirely monetize it digitally and digitally natively.
Absolutely, yeah. And I also just think like the types of sports we see, I think there's a word for it. Maybe it's super sports or something people call it already. But like as and when virtual and augmented reality fuses with conventional physical sport, we might be able to create all of these insane new sports where people would still go to a stadium, but everyone's got an AR overlay, and when a point is scored, there's like explosions or something. I don't know what. You can have a look at Rocket League to get an idea of what I'm thinking, but in the flesh, it would be pretty crazy. I think, that side of things is super exciting too.
So to bring it back to a world that any of us can get involved in, how the hell do we invest in this? What I'm listening to you is, look, my bandwidth is not big enough to find all of this stuff, right? A lot of it is a highly speculative phase, so you have to treat it like VC. Is it just simply buying Ethereum? Is Ethereum really the base layer for most of this?
Ethereum's a very good bet for this, but there's like, the Ethereum network can deliver amazing experiences, and all of this stuff can be built on it without all of that value created necessarily accruing to ETH, the asset, right? So there's definitely a disconnect there. I think, at a very casual and maximally lazy.
Yeah, that's what I'm looking at. What's the laziest way for people to play this first? And then we'll dig into a couple more specifics.
Yeah, I think Ethereum's where, a bunch of this stuff's going to be driven by. I think it's definitely kind of emerging as, the go-to in terms of robust decentralized network to build this stuff on top of. I think for me, looking at like project agnostic kind of bets that, succeed as the sector does. So scaling solutions for Ethereum is obviously a straight up one. Like the current state for, it costs a ridiculous amount right now to send transactions at the base layer. If I'm trying to send a $3 item, it might be costing me 10, 15. We've seen it up at like 30, $40. It's just not feasible as this network scales in adoption. So people are already building, scaling solutions around this stuff. There's a project called Immutable in particular, which I think is super neat. They're building a wicked sort of layer 2 on Ethereum. And then I think I'm also super interested just in a lot of projects that are kind of collapsing barriers to entry for developers. I think people are starting to see how cool all of this stuff is, but it's still tricky to engage with. So anything that kind of mediates, that those people coming into the space, I think is pretty wicked. If there's particular projects you like, everything is investable here. Most of these virtual worlds, you could buy land, you could buy wearables for your avatar, or you could buy, the native project token. Once you kind of dig into these things, there's all sorts going on there. And then we're starting to see kind of indexes which have more granularity than perhaps the ETH proxy bet or perhaps the layer 2, that's token bet. Yeah. I think the actual infrastructure for indexing is still relatively undeveloped. There's a few projects out there doing a great job, but they don't like the index composition, if you like, is limited to like floor price assets for whatever category you're talking about. Basically anyone, if you commit an asset to this index, you get given a token which basically represents your ownership in that index. And you can, if you then withdraw an asset from that index, you get randomly assigned one. So we're in this situation now where there's no incentive for anyone to put any asset that's better than the floor in, because it could randomly get arbed out by someone, basically. So that's an example of like the design still being suboptimal, but that's all changing. We're seeing some exciting stuff around the corner. So I definitely keep an eye on indexing projects as well as actual indexes that are created through them.
And I guess the exchanges where some of this stuff goes on, NFTs and gaming exchanges and stuff like that, is a pretty easy way. We don't know which exchanges win over time, but it's a decent way to participate, right?
Absolutely. It's just, again, like can be tricky to get exposure. A lot of these are just pure equity plays that are, now well funded and the cat's out the bag, but some have like a governance token, Raoul does, but obviously those need to be scrutinized on a case by case basis for value accrual and what they're actually doing. But yeah.
Yeah, it's not an easy world to get your head around, but in terms of which things to invest in, but it'll develop over time. Listen, Piers, this has been kind of mind-blowing. I'm a little bit, I knew this was going to be a good conversation, but it's like, I think when people see this, they will realize that everything they knew was wrong. That it's actually a lot bigger, because I spend a lot of time, as you know, on Twitter, and it's fighting about why it's not just a Bitcoin world or why you should invest in Bitcoin. And what's actually going on is something of a monumental scale that's kind of a humanity shift. And most people are missing this still. Now, yes, a lot of what you're looking at is super early, and it'll hit most people's radar screens probably in 5 years' time by the next cycle. But it's incredible, right? You've got to be excited.
Yeah, and Neil was saying just yesterday how crypto's, the only industry that you get FOMO in when you're not working. I think that's super true. I think, chatting to anyone that's kind of the boots on the ground around these worlds is like enormously motivated. Everyone feels like they're part of something, pretty huge. And obviously we need to be mindful of excessive enthusiasm. I think the NFT space is pretty hot right now. And I think we have a responsibility as well. A lot of people are, a huge influx of users and interest. And a lot of these people, because it's not obviously financial NFTs now, you're buying and selling content. They're not necessarily that sophisticated from an investor perspective. And I feel like a lot of these people are susceptible to getting dumped on when the secondary market collapses for your next hot potato NFT games. So I'd like to issue a word of caution for people, trying to engage with this stuff. But again, it's the classic case of overestimating in the short term and underestimating the long term.
Yeah, how the hell do you keep up with all of this? I mean, this is literally the fastest moving space I've ever seen. It moving faster than the internet was back in the 90s. I've never seen anything like it. How do you keep up with it?
With difficulty. I mean, I think I'm enormously lucky to have, had my path collide with that of Delphi's and been part of the team and grown sort of that whole business. It's now good 25 strong analysts 24/7 on this stuff. And I think the accumulated kind of, pool of IP there and know-how and domain expertise is wicked. And it's how we will stay abreast of, the broader growth of this stuff. And, we do our best job to kind of distill that down into actionable sort of stuff that reports and whatnot that people can dig into. But otherwise, if it's a particular kind of sector you're, most interested in, I think there's a few sort of thought leaders emerging around some of this stuff, which is super interesting. Definitely on the NFT side, we've seen a bunch of activity, a bunch of people with some great YouTube channels and stuff. But otherwise, the best way really is just to actually participate in these communities, be a member, participate in the governance. I mean, it's insane, like how much of a say the gathered body, if you like, has in all of this stuff. And it's super exciting.
Now you're moving on to something new now, aren't you?
I am indeed. Yeah, just started last week. Moved over to Bitcraft, who are basically one of the first dedicated esports funds in the world that started out but have now expanded in scope to cover gaming and interactive media more broadly. Awesome group of guys that were sort of early esports and kind of built the industry as we know it. So really excited to try and bridge the gap into the more traditional game investing world and try and help catalyze some of this stuff. But I mean, I know a few of the guys are super excited by this all already. So, and
that's VC in equity and token world, both?
Well, it's just equity world, but we'll see how things evolve. But yeah, unfortunately, I'm also still getting to spend a bunch of my time with Delphi, covering the sort of earlier stage stuff on the venture side. So super excited.
Brilliant. Piers, look, thank you. I really appreciate it. It was a fantastic conversation.
Thanks a lot, Raoul. It was great fun.
Thank you for watching this interview. This is just a taste of what we do at Real Vision. To learn more about the complex world of finance, business, and the global economy, click on the membership link in the description. Give us 7 days to change your life. This will be the best dollar you ever invest.